Hello everyone, thank you for joining us here today, and we're a French company, so we have a French introduction. Today I'm here with Philippe Ozio. He's the technical evangelist at Bonitasoft, and Philippe's been working for many years at Bonitasoft, sharing our newest updates and cutting-edge technologies in BPM and how to build your processes and custom applications. And today he's going to speak about a new topic that really hasn't been brought up before, called the BPM of Things. So I don't want to steal his thunder, so without further ado, I'm happy to present my colleague, Philippe Ozio.
Hello everybody, and thanks for the introduction, Sean. So I'm here to talk about BPM of Things, and that's kind of play of words. It's a mix between IoT, the Internet of Things, and processes. So during this webinar, I'm going to show you that this is a new opportunity to combine both processes and IoT. So let's go ahead. The first thing we'll see in this webinar is the opportunity in terms of market and possibilities that the IoT can bring to BPM, business process management. Then we'll try to give a brief introduction about what is a smart connected object. So we read about them all days in the news, and we don't often have a real definition or idea what these are. So I'm going to try to square it a bit and give an overview of what is a smart connected object. Then I'll explain a bit how we can integrate such objects in Bonita processes or whatever BPM processes we can have. And I conclude with a practical proof of concept that could be a real business use case. It's called sharing locker. So I'll explain a bit what we have done with a connected object and with Bonita. So without further ado, let's start with the first topic. I'll try to give you a sense of what is the opportunity of IoT in the BPM industry. We're going to start with a couple of figures here. You can try to think about these. These are taken from the future, and I have a couple of numbers here. Do you think you can imagine what these are? So I'll let you a bit of time just to think, and then I'll color that. So the first one is actually pretty obvious. It's dates. So all of these figures are taken in 2020. Can you think about the next one? Well, the next one is actually the number of people on Earth. So that's the population, 8 billion people. That's the estimate for 2020. Now the next figure is a bit more hard to figure out. That's actually the number of mobiles. So there will be more mobiles than people on Earth by 2020. And the last one, I think you're pretty good if you can think what this is. Oh, the last one is actually something that represents the number of connected objects on Earth. So depending on the institute that gives us the numbers varies, but there will be it's between a 5 and 10-fold number of mobiles or people on Earth. So that's what we should expect in 2020, 10 times at maximum the number of connected objects compared to mobiles or people. So this is a hugely growing trend to have these connected objects. These are going to change in a lot of ways the HR approach we have when we deal with projects, and we're going to have to think about different methodologies to conduct projects. Different businesses also are going to be open around these objects. So we believe at Bonitasoft that BPM of Things could be a good match to create a new market, mixing business process management and connected objects of the Internet of Things. Alright, so I've been talking a bit about the connected objects, and I haven't really explained what these are. So I'm going to take the next couple of slides to try to explain a bit what characterizes smart connected objects. So we'll see a couple of components and features they have. So to put it simply, connected object is identified with 4 components. It has 4 features. So the first thing you'll have is a sensor. The sensor is what captures events in the real world and transform these events into data. So for example, you can sense movement, you can sense light, you can sense sound, and these generate data. Then you have actuators. Actuators are things that can actually act on the real world. So for example, you can emit sound, you can emit light. These are actuators, not to be mixed with sensors. Next component is what makes the object connected, so that's the connectivity aspect. This is what allows the object to connect to external systems. So this could be Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Ethernet, whatever technology, RFID, whatever. So this is what allows the object to see other systems and other connected objects. And last of all, well, that's the glue, that's the logic, the object logic. These connected objects are smart, so they have a bit of internal logic. Now, with all of these four components, we have assembled the basic schematic of a connected object, but let's see how they can be integrated into a much more intelligent system. Well, when we have our object with its logic, sensors, actuators, and connectivity, we can connect to external information systems, and this allows to enrich the actual logic or intelligence of the object, makes it even smarter actually. What we can do is send data we have captured from sensors, exchange them with external information systems, and gain additional logic, because the logic that is already present in the object is pretty basic, so it knows a lot of small detail about how to act on sensors and actuators, but it doesn't capture data on a big scale. It's just local logic. It's not something you reprogram every day, but when you connect to an external information system, you can connect it with big data, you can connect it with other objects to create swarms of objects, and this is what makes these objects so powerful. So we're going to explore these different components of these so-called connected objects, and I'm going to show you how we could connect them inside a business process, so how we could drive those objects using business processes. So the first thing we'll need to do is to meet some requirements in order to integrate connected objects into business processes. On one hand, you'll have to expose the business process by providing ways to interact with the BPM and events of your process diagrams. So that's a way for the process to react on objects' events. That's a way to capture incoming signals from the object and to modify the business process in accordance to the signals we have received. And it's also a way to capture the object's data sensors. And then on the other way around, we need to go back to the connected objects. We need to make sure we can pilot the objects within the process. So we have to have an API in order to trigger some calls on the actuators or to provide some additional logic to the objects. So on one hand we have the BPM and events, and on the other hand we have the APIs on the object side. So in the end, you could think about these connected objects as a way to completely replace your user experience for your process. And what we believe here at Bonitasoft is that we may, at some point, well, it's not in the near future, but we may replace entirely web-based user experience with dedicated connected objects to perform some tasks. So you could, for example, have your device like a smartwatch or even a remote control and perform tasks on a process without having to use the traditional keyboard and mouse and screen combination. So that's a real opportunity to change the way we interact with business processes. And I'm going to give you a practical example of that, because it's not just theory, it's also practice. So we have been trying in the last couple of months just to put this in practice. And here I want to introduce you the proof of concept we made called sharing lockers. I'm going to explain a bit the use case behind that, and I hope you're finding it interesting. So, a couple of things about the concept. Well, the concept behind sharing lockers is actually to have lockers that allow people to exchange objects, not connected objects, just plain objects like an apple or whatever object, a pen, between each other without having to meet face-to-face. So it acts like a dead drop, more or less. You can place an object inside this box, someone gets notified and picks the object. So all of this is driven with a business process, and this allows to have agenda conflicts. So to put more in detail, the sequence of the event that will take place is the first person wishing to provide the object. Let's call him Dave. Dave wants to provide an object to John, and so Dave will have to register a sharing locker. So he'll go online with his phone or whatever application. He will register a locker, and the application will provide him the location of the locker that can be rented. He will have an access code to open the locker. He will be able to place his object within the locker and close the locker door. Then the locker will send an invitation by email to the person wishing to retrieve the object, so that's John. And John will have the location of the locker and the code to unlock the locker. So he will be able to go pick up the object, and then the locker will actually take a picture of him and send it to Dave, which shared the object, saying your object has been picked up by John. Here's the picture of John picking up the object. So that's the use case we tried to implement in a couple of days. And another similar concept exists with rental cars. You know, these cars that sit on the street that you can pick up, drive a couple of days, and then leave on the street again for someone else to use. That's more or less the same thing. This is inspired by that. Now let's get into details about how we implemented such a thing. Well, to implement that, we used open source technology. So we're really fond of open source, as you know. And we used the following 4 components. We use Bonita BPM, ready for smart applications, because it has the APIs and it has the support for BPM and BPM Process, which allows us to drive the connected object. For the connected objects, we use a Raspberry Pi, so that's the object controller. We had a couple of peripherals on the Raspberry Pi, such as the code, the keypad for the code, and the webcam for taking the picture. We have also the lock, a pseudo lock. It's not a real lock. You'll see some images on the next slide. We used also Node-RED. So Node-RED is actually a software that allows you to program the Raspberry Pi in some sort of graphical manner. So it's a software tool that allows us to draw schemas of the different interactions between the controller and the peripherals of the Raspberry Pi. So this allows us to preload the logic onto the Raspberry Pi before actually running the demo. And lastly, we had PostgreSQL for storing business data related to our process, so people renting the locker, location of the locker, code, etc. Now, a couple of screenshots. I'm sorry for the poor quality. We didn't take a good image resolution. So this is the example of the locker. Well, it's made of cardboard, to be frank with you. We didn't invest too much in real packaging here, but the concept is here. You can see the screen of the locker, and you can see an object within the locker. So this is the content. The Raspberry Pi is actually inside this, and it's actually connected to Bonita BPM, but it's sitting on another server. Next. We have the object. So here on the top of the first image you can see the Raspberry Pi, so it's very small. It has an SD card with some logic pre-installed on it, and you can see a bunch of controllers. On the lower right side you have the webcam, and on the lower left side, sorry, you have the screen. So these are the different peripherals of the connected object. That's the locker more or less if you remove the packaging. And then on the right you have an example of what we did with Node-RED to program the connected object logic. So this is a sort of graph made of signals between actuators and sensors and the connectivity elements that allows us to communicate with Bonita. And last of all, here this is the business process we have in Bonita BPM. So you can see the different steps that took place. So again, just to make sure everyone understands, we first generate the access code. So this is done by Bonita. Once someone has started the process, of course, I forgot to mention that. It's a request from Dave to start the process to share an object. So we generate an access code. We send the access code to the locker or the Raspberry. We send the access code also by email to Dave so that he knows how to open the locker. And then we wait for the empty locker door to be open. Once the locker door is open and the door is closed, we are waiting for an event from the Raspberry. So we have used one single event in the middle to make sure we capture all of them with this, and we use a combination of different conditions to trigger some routing on different paths. So we'll start first with the upper bench. We drop off the object, we close the locker door, so the object is within the locker. Then we receive another signal from the Raspberry Pi. We send the access code to the person receiving the object, so that's John. John gets an email with the code. Then it's not the updated version of the site, but the task to send the access code is written twice. Anyway, John opens the locker door, picks up the object, and here we're missing also the part about taking the picture of John and sending it back to Dave. But this is more or less what happens. So using just automated task and human task in this message receive events from BPM process, we were able to enrich the object logic to drive us through the sharing locker example. And to put it to more context, this is what happens. You have your locker sitting on one side, and you have your Bonita process, sharing locker process, connecting to the object using REST. So it's calling, it's setting, for example, the access code using REST. So the object logic now is able to work in kind of offline mode because it has the access code of the locker. And when someone unlocks the locker or closes the door, the object is able to send BPM and messages using the Bonita REST APIs, and this triggers back the process, so it unlocks the execution flow. So this is fairly simple to put in place actually, and here I'm just give you an estimation about how much time and how much effort we put into that. Of course, we already know Bonita, so we're kind of cheating. We're not starting from scratch. Now, one thing we did not know was the Raspberry Pi aspect. We were not really experts in Raspberry Pi. But believe it or not, it took 2 days of work, well, rather intense days to be honest. This was long days, like a hackathon. 3 developers, so not newbies to be honest also, but still it wasn't that much advanced code we wrote. And hardware cost was pretty low actually, because it cost us less than 100 euros, so converting to dollars, well, you can say also $100 now, so less than $100. And for the software part, $0. Why is that? Because everything used in this project was available as open source technology, so that's very important to highlight here. You can achieve these kinds of use cases with just plain old open source technology. So in the end, we can just conclude that we just implemented this PoC really successfully and without much investment in terms of time or resources. So that's a pretty positive feedback. Of course, we're not doing something that scales. We haven't really created an object that we can market right now, but still the basic idea just to test if it's feasible or not was a success. We knew it was something we could do if we had more time. So that's really encouraging side here. Now, to conclude a bit about the part about the presentation, we've seen in this webinar that the connected objects are getting more and more into our everyday life, so we're using them more and more for interacting with software. So these are new ways to actually exchange information with software. So they can actually, in some near future, replace entirely the traditional web-based user interfaces or hard-coded classical applications by replacing them. So we believe they can replace mouses and keyboards. So that's it for my presentation. It was a bit short compared to what we do usually. I'm now going to open for questions. So I already have a first question, just to make sure everybody, Sean already answered, thanks Sean, but I will just make sure everybody can hear it out now. For those who did miss some part of the presentation, we'll make the entire video of the presentation available online in a couple of days. That's the time to process it. Now, I have also a question regarding security, and that's a growing fear in, yeah, I could say fear, yeah. It's a growing fear in the IoT industry. So how are connected objects secured? Are they really secure? Can we really send sensitive information? And how easy would it be to hack them? Well, that's really a major problem for the IoT industry, because the main issue with those connected objects is that they have fairly limited processing capabilities. The Raspberry Pi is not very powerful in terms of CPU, so we're not able to use complex encryption algorithms, and that's going to be really a big challenge. The more we have connected objects, the more we'll see probably tremendous hacks going on around. And this is going to be more and more dangerous, because these objects will have more power on our everyday life. So I have another question. Are there forums for discussion on this? Well, there are some forums for the IoT, there are forums for the for BPM. I do not think there is a forum that mixes both topics, but if you talk about Raspberry Pi enthusiasts, I'm sure they will be open to discussion. I have a question also: is there a specific partner channel at Bonitasoft that is maintained for this specific industry verticals? Well, not yet. That's actually an open position. I'm not aware of of a company that has yet been doing connect objects with Bonita. We had some customers playing with drones and Bonita, but it wasn't really to pilot the drones themselves. So I must say that this is something that is going to come. This is just an insight of what is possible, and hopefully after this webinar there will be more people interested in playing with BPM and IoT. Well, I can give you another example. If someone was asking for another example of application, and actually we did another one actually at EclipseCon in Germany for EclipseCon Europe last winter. We had it was a conference in which people were mainly talking about Eclipse, but they were also talking about IoT. And here we demonstrated another use case of a process mixed up with a connected object. So we had a connected object with the webcam, and we created an application for a Visa application. So this software would allow us to start a Visa application, and at some point we would have to take a picture, so we could go to the connected object, wait for the picture to be taken, and get back to the process application and complete the Visa application with the picture taken from the connected object. I have another question here, and actually I'm just thinking maybe it wasn't that clear in my explanations. The question is, will the process reside in the smart object? So no, the process is not residing in the smart object. The process is actually sitting on a real server, and it only communicates with REST with the connected object. The Bonita could run on the connected object, but that's not the purpose here. Bonita acts actually as a central server in this case. You could have more lockers, so each locker will then communicate to the central server. You will not place your business process management solution onto the connected object. The object needs to rely on its internal logic plus on the instructions provided remotely by the central server. That's how it works.
Philippe?
Oh, yeah, thanks, Son. Yes.
Yeah, there's a question more generally about Bonitasoft of how can business engage with Bonitasoft in Canada? And then also, are there forums for discussions on this topic?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Actually, I did answer the second one, but the first one I did not answer. If you want to engage with Bonitasoft, you have to contact our sales rep. They will point you out to our channel manager, which in turn can pick up either a partner for you or direct it to the right person. So if you go on the Bonita website, you'll have a contact us section in which you can exchange. Another question here is the example I presented, BPM and compliance. Well, the processes we run on Bonita BPM are BPM and compliance. So if I go back here, And if I show you back this one, well, it's more or less BPM compliant. If you're talking about a pure business process analyst, he might say this is not compliant because it's mainly lacking human tasks. But it's not forbidden, but generally business processes allow to interact with human actors. Here, you don't directly interact with a human actor, but you do interact with the connected object, which in turn is connected to the, it's interacted with the human person. So the diagram is BPMN compliant. Now the use case is on the verge of BPMN, because BPMN wasn't made for that, so it needs to evolve. That's what we think. But all the elements here and the design can be BPMN compliant. Can this use case accommodate human interfaces? So yes, and actually I did not show the screens in my example of the sharing locker, but the first form actually that triggers the sharing locker is actually a software interface. So it's actually executed either on the phone or on a traditional desktop screen. So you can mix, of course, human interfaces with forms and just the connected object interactions. The name of the software for the Raspberry Pi was Node-RED. You can get it back here. So this is one of the possible tools you can use to program the Raspberry Pi. This one is pretty interesting because it's fairly visual stuff. So even if you don't want to write some C or low-level programming, you can pretty much draw the interaction of your object with its environment with just this. Again, it's open source, so don't hesitate to give it a try. Okay, I have another question. This example that I gave, is it really an object-to-object communication? Well, yes and no, because the object is communicating with a central server, and so the lockers are not communicating between each other. So if you had two lockers, they wouldn't communicate between each other, but they would still communicate with the server. I'm not considering a server as a connected, it is a connected object, but it's not exactly a smart connected object because it doesn't have much actuators. But you can imagine some kind of implementation in which you had a swarm or a bunch of connected objects that can exchange between each other. And yes, an Arduino would work exactly the same way for this example. You don't need to have a Raspberry Pi if you have an Arduino. It's just more or less the same thing. It's just the tools you can use on it, which may be different. A use case for the food industry. Do I have a use case for the food industry? Let me think. I did have one for the energy industry, and I think I can figure out something that in order to adapt it. So if you talk about the food industry, well, you can figure out a supermarket on which you have items sitting on stands, and with a connected object, you could be able to measure the amount of items on the stand and reorder some items when the number of items are too low. And actually, there's a proof of concept that is being conducted by Amazon. Actually, they will give you a smart connected object with just a button that allows you to press it when you require some certain kind of object. So, for example, if you're out of I don't know, if you're out of soap, for example, you can have a button next to your soap and you can press it, and this will automatically reorder some soap for you. So they're doing some kind of proof of concept for that, trying to see if they can mix the industry with, well, the IoT industry with directly basic goods consumptions. Another use cases, because I talked about the energy industry, another use cases for energy consumption. There are plenty of devices that you can install at your home to automatically monitor your energy consumption. And there's a lot of appliances that exist to control switches, electrical switches, so you can turn on and turn off things based on the time and your current energy consumption. When I was at ExcelsiusCon, I saw a pretty interesting conference about someone who was trying to minimize his footprint, energy footprint, with the use of connected objects. So this person would actually have temperature sensors inside his house and automatically open some windows based on the current weather outside and temperature inside his room. So you can have stuff like that. You can also trigger some washing machines to be executed when it costs less amount of money to use energy. Lots of different possible use cases for these objects. And this gets pretty interesting when you put them in a grid. So for example, for energy companies, this is very interesting to monitor the energy consumption on the grid and to make sure they can adapt and react to energy surge. Oh yeah, sorry, I missed one. The question was, so in the example I gave, do we have two smart objects that communicate using the BPM process? So I could say yes, because we had the phone and we had also the locker. So yes, in this sense, you could say that these are two smart objects that communicate using BPM process. But the difference is that the phone or the laptop used to see the forms are not very much controlled by the process. They're just a way to provide input. They don't really act based on the process. Another question: have I set up PBX * to interact with BPM? PBX. Sorry, I'm not familiar with this term. I'm not aware of it, but we do have some interactions, for example, with printers and scanner systems with Bonita. But I don't think there's any issue or any blocker to prevent an interaction with a PBX. Basically, as long as you have some API that is available on your system, we're able to interact with it. So because Bonita is full of APIs, it's really meant to interact with external systems. But this is not exactly a connected object. Good question. With IoT, do you see a major change in the way business process management will be handled? More devices rather than human as actors? Well, we have to think that yes, more likely there will be more devices. But another thing that is important is to see that we're going to use less knowingly these business processes, because we're just going to interact with objects around us. So we'll have less the feeling to be connected with directly our phone or our PC. So we may in the end just interact with BPM without knowing it as humans. That's what I think. And actually this is going to be pretty good, because this will reduce a bit the pain and the effort to use BPM, so that's pretty good. Okay, so I think we're done with the questions, so I want to thank you all for attending, and I hope this talk has inspired you. So this was not too technical compared to the other webinars we host. I'm sorry I couldn't make the demo live, but I hope you got a sense about the benefits that IoT represents for the industry, especially what you can do with BPM and IoT combined. So thank you again, and have a good day.